This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, Spencer. Thanks ever so much for joining us today and agreeing to chat. So the reason I've asked you on is because you have a diagnosis, I believe. What is your diagnosis, Spencer?
I was diagnosed with autism at an early age, and I was told a few years later, once parents thought I was old enough to understand what that would mean for me. I also have a handful of other smaller diagnoses, dyspraxia, dyslexia, whole package really, just a whole bunch of different things.
Okay, so your main diagnosis is autism.
Yes.
And is it purely autism, or was it Asperger's, or?
I think it was Asperger's syndrome, but mainly these days just talk about it as autism.
Yes, indeed. So no, that's all right. I just wanted to know because of the time and how young you were when you got the diagnosis. So when your mum and dad spoke to you about your diagnosis, how old were you when they actually told you?
I don't really remember. I believe it was probably about 10, maybe 8 or so when they told me. I remember we were on holiday in France, and they used a book that talked about autism, and they gave me like a picture book to explain what was going on and what was going to be different in my life moving forward.
Okay.
And what had already been different in my life up to that point. It didn't just start the day I found out.
No, indeed. How did it make you feel? Did it make you feel any different knowing that you had a diagnosis, or did it freak you
I'll be
out
honest,
at all?
I didn't care. I really didn't care at the time. I was like, huh, okay. And then I got on with my life.
Excellent. No, that's good. That will help a lot of people too, because the fear of telling a child and how they're going to take it, and of course everyone's going to be different as to how they do take that information. But that's really good that you had that that thought.
No one should be scared of talking about who and what they are. Even neurotypical people are all different to each other. What's one extra labeled, named scientific difference? It's just another thing. It's nothing to be worried about.
Good. No, that's excellent. So how did you find childhood? Because we're talking about everybody's different. So how was your childhood different to the rest of the people, or a lot, or the majority of the people that you were growing up around and going to school with?
I spent a lot of my younger years engaging in the lesson material, but not particularly the social aspect of school. I'd sit in the corner and read a book. If I didn't like the lesson, I wouldn't really participate, and the teachers just sort of let me get on. And I learned plenty from books and from the lessons I did pay attention to. But when I started taking things a bit more seriously and engaging in the way that most people would go to school, started having friends and friend groups, it became a lot more normal. I became a lot more recognizably, I guess you might call it masking, or you might just call it getting on with life. But I became more normal, air quotes around it. But like, people would not have raised an eyebrow as much at my behavior once I started getting the hang of it and all.
Right. So when you say you're getting the hang of it, so were you observing what was going on around you to purposely try and fit in, or did it just come as a progression?
It just came as a progression when I realized that participating in life was quite fun and not just sitting alone in the corner reading all the time. If you balance your hobbies, if you engage with people and engage with books and isolation, it's more fun. It's more valuable. You enjoy things more.
Okay. So when you were younger and you were staying in your own, reading your own books and that, what was the reason behind that? Was that because you didn't feel comfortable going into the situation of other people and friends, or was it that you just felt different?
I do not entirely recall, because a lot of my memories from early life are extremely vague and fuzzy because I wasn't paying attention. So they didn't record in your brain properly. But I don't particularly remember being scared. I remember being bored. Other people were boring. I didn't understand the appeal of other people, but books were really interesting. So I read books to stave off the boredom.
Brilliant. Okay. So your school life turned out to be not too bad then, would that be correct from what you're saying?
I was bullied when I was younger, but it never really bothered me particularly. Bothered my siblings, but it didn't really affect me very much. But it changed the way in which I interacted with people, but it didn't upset me at all.
Right.
The bullying made my life different, but it didn't really bother me at all. Mainly, it was a slightly unfair version of TIG for the most part. They called it Spencer germs, and I was always it, and I always chased everyone, and I enjoyed it. Chasing the other kids around was vaguely fun, but it was always on. They were always running away from me and like laughing and screaming and like tripping each other over so I'd get them or whatever. Basically, just TIG, but always. And I didn't really care because honestly, some of the time it just got people away when I wanted them away, and that was useful. I don't really remember who started it or how it started. I just remember it going on for ages until one of the teachers called like a school assembly about it because my sister was starting to get bullied tangentially because of me, and it was starting to affect her negatively. So ended up
Right.
getting shut down by our school.
Yeah. Oh gosh. And that is interesting how it was affecting your siblings because of yourself, and that must be quite hard to digest, really. Yeah. So you got through school. Did you go to college or university?
Yeah, I went to a technical college in year 10. I left the school I had been in and I went to learn engineering because it was a technical college that specialized in just year 11, 12, and then the sixth form years.
Uh-huh. And you enjoyed that because it was based around information that you were interested in?
Yeah, I did. I was interested in engineering and coming up with an idea and then designing it and then assembling it, manufacturing all the bits and putting it all together and then having the thing that you came up with the idea for. Just making ideas real was interesting to me. And I liked the whole iterative process of making something better and better over and over. Doing my actual qualifications and all the studying and the research and all of that turned out to not be quite what I expected, and I felt a bit let down, but that's just how they did the qualification. That's how it was structured.
Yeah. And I think from a previous conversation I've had with you, if I remember rightly, you were saying that sometimes the teachers or the lecturers annoyed you because you seemed to know a little bit more than they did when they were trying to teach you certain things in terms of their understanding of stuff. Is that right?
Yes, that's when I moved into Lincoln College after I finished at UTC. I went all the way up to A levels in UTC. I moved to Lincoln College to study engineering further because I'd focused my A levels on physics and computer science because those are also things that interested me. For much the same reason, physics for understanding how the physical aspects of the world work, and computer science for understanding how computers work and possibly making my own code and programs and other interesting bits like that. Much the same sort of construction and design intrigue from engineering, but in coding instead. But after I finished my A levels and I went into Lincoln College, the tutelage there was of a lower quality, unfortunately. They're stretched too thin place, but it led to an interesting situation where, because of my A level in maths, I was actually more qualified than my maths teacher. I had a level 3 qualification. She had a level 2 qualification, and that was an interesting situation to be in, especially since she was teaching the mechanics part of a level 3 course. So she was just not quite qualified for it. But since she wasn't teaching a whole level 3 curriculum, they just had to make do. But being more qualified than her and having covered every topic she covered in a greater detail in my A level, it was frustrating to see her overcomplicate and confuse things for the other students. I felt so sorry for some of the kids who weren't as good as maths as I was, or who found maths boring and difficult, because they just had no chance. She gave them no chance. She baffled them constantly with incorrect nonsense, or just nonsense that was so overcomplicated when you could have just done it the most simple, normal, benign way. She'd always make things 10 times harder than they needed to be because she herself didn't understand what was going on. And whenever anyone asked her a question, she'd almost always answer a different question than they asked. And it was so frustrating.
I can imagine.
Just to see everyone else have to deal with an inadequate teacher.
Yeah. No, it was interesting that how you dealt with things like that. It's good and well done for getting through that as much as annoyance it was. So you've left college. You've done your UCT. You've left college. You've managed to navigate your way through school in whatever way, which you found quite good. So now the world of work. How have you found the world of work, and how is that treating you?
At first, job hunting, of course, is notoriously difficult and fiddly, especially in a place like Lincolnshire, where it's a lot smaller than other places and everything's so far apart. It's a bit of a pain to hunt for work. But once I did find work, I did manage to settle down in an engineering firm that was small and very local. And I thought the closeness of a small business would be good for me, but unfortunately, there was a lot of unfortunate coincidences that stacked up on top of each other. Unfortunately, my dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer a couple months into my job, and around that time, I also started having terrible anxiety at work because I was unsure about I didn't know if I was doing a good job or not, because there was no communication with my boss. He was very isolated and away from me. I could not talk to him, and even if he was around, he was such a closed off individual. It was very hard to feel like I could talk to him at all. And so instead of talking about any of my issues, I didn't know what to do. I just got more and more stressed, more and more anxious, more and more unsure of whether I was doing the right thing. I started taking breaks for panic attacks and anxiety. I was unable to do my job correctly. I couldn't concentrate. My attention span started failing, and that all mixed in with grieving for the approaching death of my father. It all became too much, and I just wasn't working efficiently enough. And being a small business, small local business, they could not afford to keep me on if I wasn't being productive enough. So I was unfortunately laid off, and it was very stressful. It was very difficult for all of us at that time.
And indeed, and yeah, you had a lot on, and I think it goes to show that the condition and the diagnosis isn't necessarily what causes the problems or issues that can be having. It's the stress and the anxiety behind it that is the struggles that we tend to have more so than the actual diagnosis. And when you get to overload, it just becomes so much harder to deal with. But how are things now with regards to work? Are you, because I know you're not in employed position at the moment, or am I, or has that changed since we last spoke?
I'm in the middle of a work experience in retail, but I'm working with the job centre to help me with my job hunting, and I am looking for part-time employment at the moment. But having such a unpleasant and potentially traumatic experience with work, my first job, I've I'm 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 hesitant to go back into a full-time 5 day a week, 8 hour work days proper job. I'm hesitant to go back to my engineering career. I'm unsure about the whole thing. It's a very stressful situation, as well as the financial situation I've been put in, that we've been put in, because of my dad passing away. Unfortunately, it was not a cancer. He actually had a. We were told it was liver cancer and that he would have 6 months to live without treatment. So, getting treatment, we were expecting a year, and I think it was about 2 months after his diagnosis that he passed away, because it wasn't actually cancer. They misdiagnosed an ulcer as cancer, and a lot of the tests they tried to do to get a positive on the cancer, rather than just examining the shape of the growth on the X-ray and the MRI, a lot of what they tried to do simply agitated the ulcer further, and possibly even ruptured it, causing internal bleeding in his liver. So he just sort of withered away, and his body gave out one evening, and the ambulance couldn't do anything, and it was deeply unpleasant.
Mm, mm. And condolences to yourself and your family for that. And it's an awful situation that you are finding yourself having to deal with within the whole family. Um, and is that something you find very hard to deal with because of the way things happened, or are you able to get your head around it in a different way?
I've done everything I can to make something positive of this. It's brought the family closer together, and I've had to take on more responsibility since Dad isn't around anymore to do a lot of housework. I've had to take on the I've had to take on a lot of his responsibilities, and I'm having to look after my mum more emotionally. She's a fully capable woman. She's amazing, but she's struggling at the minute because he was such a huge part of her life for so many years, and his passing's just changed so much of how she is in her day-to-day life. So many daily rituals are gone now.
Indeed. And how you're coping with it is remarkable. Really, really good to be able to step up and do that. And if you don't mind, I'm not brushing over what you're saying, but I was very interested when you said you're reluctant. I don't think you mentioned the word fearful, but whether fearful is the right word, to go back into engineering or to go back into an 8-hour job. Is that because of the fear of not being able to do an 8-hour full-time job, or what is the reluctance within that, would you say?
I'm anxious to go back into engineering in case I have more people like my old job, where communication is so difficult and I feel unseen and ignored and potentially just abandoned, really. I'm also hesitant to go back into 8 hours of work because it was physically exhausting and it just drained me. I wasn't myself when I came home from the end of a work day. I did things I wouldn't normally, and I didn't like what it was doing to me as well. I just don't think I can handle working for that much time.
Mhm.
I don't
So,
think I'm capable as a person.
right. So you're highly qualified in terms of you're very, very bright. You've got
Yes.
your qualifications, you've got your A levels, etc. And people would think, well, yes, you can get a job. But with regard to, is it the physical um, element of having to try and fit in every day that's the draining side of things, or do you think it's just the thought process of having to do the work that and because of your various diagnoses that it is draining you through the day? What part would you contribute to that?
There are three main components to the exhaustion I feel. Of course, engineering is a physically strenuous activity. It takes physical effort. You have to lift heavy things, you have to lug things around, use tools, put force into motions. It is a physically difficult job. But added to that was the constant stress. I had not been in many high stress situations, and yet every single day was very, very stressful. Lots of rushing around, lots of very quick thinking, lots of problem after problem after problem needing solving and solving and solving. It was a lot of strain to put my mind and emotions under. And then the third component was this constant presence of other people around you, but not talking to them, the awkwardness and the anxiety and the unsureness of whether I should be talking to them or whether I should be getting on or what to say to them. What small talk do I try and initiate? I didn't get to know very many of the people in my job at all because I just didn't get to talk to them because either I was so scared or I was so busy that I just couldn't. The only people who ever I got to talk to were the people who approached me and broke the ice and made me feel welcome, made me feel comfortable.
Right. Okay. So yeah, and I think we forget that as to just how difficult it is to try and bring all of that in as to when do you approach somebody, when is it okay to have a chat, even though I should be working, but can I just take 5 minutes out? And it does become mentally and physically demanding, doesn't it? So yeah, I appreciate that. So you're looking at retail. You're doing some voluntary work, which is really good to help you.
Yes, the job centre phoned up and no, it was actually one of our appointments. The job centre let me know about something that a store was doing, a work experience for 4 weeks, and I'm in the third week of that work experience now. And though it is 5 days a week, it is only 5 hours a day, and I've found that 5 hours, maybe 6 hours, is working out pretty well for me. I feel like I'm comfortable with this many hours, and um, the biggest thing though is the work environment. The people I'm working with are so kind and supportive and encouraging. It feels like they want me to do the best I can rather than wanting me to do the most for them that I can. Um, they they're completely willing and allowing for me to make boundaries about tasks I don't like or that upset or stress me. Um, One of my colleagues' attitudes towards just her sheer speed and ferocity with um, stacking the food aisle with unloading pallets was so fast, and she expected me to keep up to a degree, or at least I felt like she expected me to keep up. And it was extremely stressful for me. And I talked to another colleague about it. And then the next time I was put on that task with her, things were a lot calmer and slower and smoother. It felt like that she'd it felt like she'd been told this information by the colleague that I confided in about my stress and discomfort, and that she'd made space for me at my own pace, and it was very comfortable. And I'm anxious about whether or not I'll get a position at the end of the work experience, because that is something that could happen. And it was advertised as potentially leading into a position. And I'm anxious about the fact that maybe I don't contribute enough because of some of my slowness, but I'm also a very fastidious organizer. I like to arrange things very tidily and neatly, and that's something that this particular store is somewhat lacking in their performance reviews. Someone to neatly organize things, to care very much about placement and having the correct ticket on the correct product, and so on and so forth. So I really hope it'll lead into a job, because at least for a while I situate myself and continue with my counseling and therapy, to help me get back into a working mindset, this would be a very nice job to just keep an inflow of cash and keep me to a sort of schedule where I need to get up early and get to a place and be there for a while, and then I get to come home after I've worked hard. That routine would be good for me, but it still leaves me with only 5 hours working there. It leaves me with a lot of free time still to enjoy myself and relax and have a social life and have friends.
Excellent. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it a day on that today, because that was really interesting about your journey there. But I would like to come back at some point and talk about friendships and how you've dealt with friendships, because that's something a lot of children and adults really struggle with. How do we hold friends, and how do we do that? And with you mentioning it a couple of times, it'd be really nice to come back and talk about that, if that's all right.
Absolutely, I'd love to.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Spencer.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.